Does that work? We're using the microphone because this is being recorded. So, and also we'll help everyone hear a little bit better with the furnace blowing over there. Thank you all for coming. I am so excited to welcome my friend, colleague, beloved mentor, Jodi Hayashida, to our church this evening. Jodi was actually the first UU minister I ever met in my life. I didn't even know UUism existed before I met Jodi. Wandering around Lewiston, Auburn, the only church that had a rainbow flag out when I was 18 years old. So it's really special to be in my church now, welcoming you in. Jodi currently serves as, what is your title? Convener, chaplain, minister, organizer at Moral Movement Maine, and is doing some really interesting justice grassroots building that you are just beginning right now. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Excited to hear what you have to say to us.
Thank you all very much. This group is so lovely. I had expected a smaller group. So this is delightful. I have organized mostly conversation, which will still work with the larger group, but let me know if you are hungry for a little more presentation than I'm giving you. So we're still small enough that I would love for us to start with introductions, because you all are in community together here, but I'm hoping that I will continue to be in community with you throughout this work. And I would love to start to get to know you. Before we do introductions, though, I'm going to read a poem. One of the pieces that I have enjoyed about working with Maine People's Alliance, which is the group that I'm with, is that we have a staff meeting every day, and every staff meeting starts with a getting to know you question. So even though there are those of us who don't work together, we still get to know each other through these questions. So I'm going to ask us a getting to know you question related to this poem. Some of you may have seen it flying around. It was written in, I think, 2003 by Ann Weems, who's a Presbyterian. But it's resurfaced for reasons that will probably become clear. It's called "I No Longer Pray for Peace." On the edge of war, 1 foot already in, I no longer pray for peace. I pray for miracles. I pray that stone hearts will turn to tender-heartedness, and evil intentions will turn to mercifulness, and all the soldiers already deployed will be snatched out of harm's way, and the whole world will be astounded onto its knees. I pray that all the God talk will take bones and stand up and shed its cloak of faithlessness and walk again in its powerful truth. I pray that the whole world might sit down together and share its bread and its wine. Some say there is no hope, but then I've always applauded the holy fools who never seem to give up on the scandalousness of our faith, that we are loved by God, that we can truly love one another. I no longer pray for peace. I pray for miracles. Of course, with the language in this poem, you can tell it was written by a Christian for a Christian community. And yet we, as UUs, are acclimated to translating if that language doesn't resonate quite right for us. What strikes me in this poem is her hope that the God talk of her faith will take up bones and shed the cloak of faithlessness, which I understand to be a call, a wish in her own heart, a prayer for true faithfulness, ears to hear the call of her faith into the work of embodying the teachings of her faith, of radical love, of fierce hope, of deep presence, of the creation of justice. And because we are here to spend some time talking about doing justice together, rooted in our faith, I was hoping that as we introduce ourselves, we might also be willing to share in just a few moments each what it is about our particular faith, whether it's a belief or an experience or a feeling that calls us to believe that the bones can stand up and that we can continue to shed our own cloaks of faithlessness, which we all wrap ourselves in every once in a while. So there's no right answer. There's just whatever comes to mind for you. So I will introduce myself first, Jodi Hayashida. Something for me that calls and compels me. I truly am grounded in an unshakable belief in the sacredness of every life, which sometimes makes me very angry that I believe that. Because there are some people that I don't want to be called to love, because I really don't like them. Really don't like them. And yet I do believe that they are sacred, and I do believe that we are called to love one another. And so while it is a challenge, it really is what has saved me in times of struggle in my own life. And as I look out at the world with all of its brokenness, because I hear that call so clearly, I can't not do the work. And sometimes I need to do the work so that I don't fall into despair.
Hi, I'm Sharon, and I came because I love Jodi. She was my minister for 20 years, and I know nothing about her new job. And I'd like to find out more so that I can figure out what I can do, if there's something I can do. And I dragged along my friend, who
I'm Judy, and I think you are the one who christened me as an optimistic pessimist. And right now in this world, I'm afraid I'm leaning more towards the pessimism. So I'm looking for help and hope to get to the other side.
Wow, real microphone. My name's Albert. I guess as far as the faith part, I really respect nature, reality, and I find a lot of reality in the ocean. It's endless and so much more than there is on the land. Not to take away from landlubbers, but the ocean just, when I'm really stressed out or upset or whatever, if I'm spending time on the ocean, things come clearer. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Barbara, and I just love the sanctity of nature, and actually feeling that as human beings, we pretty much crush it most of the time, and really don't have a place in nature anymore. So perhaps we can find that someday.
Hi, I'm Kathy, and I don't know about faith. I'm actually probably a skeptic at heart. I don't know if we're going to make much of a difference at all, but what's the alternative? You got to try. So here we are.
Hi, I'm Peg. I'm not exactly sure why I'm here. I have, I've been coming to you for about a year now, and I saw this in the bulletin, and I don't really know a whole lot about what you're doing, what your work is. So I'm curious. I'm open, and what more can you ask for?
Hi, I'm Larissa. I, somewhat like Peg, I'm curious. And I think that I'm simultaneously thinking that in my smaller world, it's possible to make change. And in the larger world, I'm feeling very overwhelmed and as though it's virtually impossible.
Hi, I'm Ernie. I was brought up in a Jewish tradition, and what's left is Hillel, who was asked, well, what do you believe? And he said, care about others, all the rest is commentary. And I think that what you're doing is caring about others, and it doesn't need a lot of commentary.
I'm Leah, and I came here because I love morality. That word caught in my eyes, gave me a spark. I said, "Oh, is there still morality? Cool."
I'm Jen, and I'm a member of this church for close to 25 years. And I love how grounded I feel when I'm here. And I just saw the announcement and was called to be here because I too just feel so much despair with what's going on in the world right now. And any way that I can, I don't know, be connected to maybe help in some way. I want to be connected to that movement so that I can find where to help out.
I'm Dorothy, and I went to Quaker meeting for a number of years, and from that I got, there's that of God in everyone. And I like to translate it because there's that of God in everything. And when you spoke about the bones, it made me think of structure. And what makes bones work are all the connections. And so you all can be part of the structure, and we can make connections however we can. And maybe that's where the miracles happen.
Hi, I'm Gwen. And Dorothy said it so much more eloquently than I would. But for me, it's the interdependent web of life. Just thinking how we are all connected and all, like Jodi was talking about, all valuable, worthy, important.
I'm John, and I grew up steeped in Unitarianism. My family goes back to about a century in this faith. I loved at that point the intellectual freedom and faith freedom that it afforded, but it made it so independent that I left the church, only to return in my 40s because what I began to appreciate was practicing your faith, but doing it within the community. And that's what it's been about since then.
I married this guy because we think exactly alike. I'm Jane, and I've been a member of this church for a long time. And I think one of the things about our faith that I find so empowering is that we don't even pretend that we've got all the answers. You know, it's this free and responsible search for meaning. We don't have a lock on the truth. Truth isn't sealed. It's not like a lot of Christian dogma that seems to get, you know, pulled this way and that way as if it were rubber to fit whatever is convenient for the times. But I agree with John that being able to engage in that free and responsible search for meaning with other like-minded individuals to help each other figure out where the moral compass is pointing and how we can be of use, big or small impact, fills me with faith.
I'm John. I happen to be the father of 4 different nationality children, and I think it's important that we get along.
Hi, I have a weird first name. I'm Mary Atla. People call me Mary Lassard is my last name. And I was raised Catholic.
I chose to go to a Catholic college because I've always been very spiritual and very interested in being able to be close to God. Thought about being a nun at one time. And and I first went to a Universalist church in Portland after I was getting divorced, and the Catholic Church didn't approve of divorce. And I had 2 gay sons. 3 strikes, you're out. So I have not only experienced what it's like to be sort of on the outs sometime, and I joined first the church in Portland, and I was just so happy. And I was a member of Jodi's church for 17 years. I'm a little sad but I have a new church. I am also Hillary's mother's best friend. And that's really a wonderful claim to fame. So I joined, John lives in Topsom, I live in Freeport. So we joined the church in Brunswick. And I was a social worker and a teacher for my whole life. And I just retired in June. I'm 78 years old and I'm lost. I love helping people. It is my life. It's what I care about. It's what I do well. And I am very disturbed about the world and what's happening. I'm an activist kind of person. I'll go out and do anything. Right now, can't do much, but I can make phone calls. And so I'm very interested. I've been looking for something else to do that would help make the world a little better place.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hillary. I serve as the minister here at First U. And I lately, because it changes all the time, what gets me out of bed in the morning, but lately I'm fascinated by love and the fact that we all have the capacity to love and the capacity to feel love, and how feeling loved feels better than anything else. And so what's that about? What is that about? That we need and can give love that other people need. How do we do that more?
And what I love about that is when we talked about love at First Universalist, we usually talked about how in church, we're usually speaking about it as an action, a way of being with one another and not a feeling. And yet hearing you say that it feels better than anything else, I'm thinking, oh, I wish I could give a sermon about how that feeling is. Ponder. Yeah. Thank you all for sharing those pieces of yourselves. What I feel like I heard was that potent combination of what grounds us, and what calls us, and also what troubles us, which taken all together is pretty much what makes us human. So yeah, I appreciate being in this circle with you all. So if it feels okay, I'd like to scoot into, for just a while, a bit of discussion about Moral Movement Maine itself, what it has been, where we are now in our development, and then have some conversation with you all about that. Does that feel okay? Okay. Let me check, just because we do have limited time. My plan for tonight was to give you a quick history, where we are now, talk with you about it, as I just said, and then talk with you about some concrete ways that you could engage in the future. But is there anything else that you all were expecting that we would talk about tonight, or that you want to be sure we talk about tonight? Yes. Morality. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's another good sermon, Hillary. I don't get to, you have to do it now. Yes, that's an excellent question. And that is exactly the type of discernment that I would hope we would do together in this movement. So I don't know how deeply we'll be able to go into that question tonight, but we will be sure to at least touch on it for now. Okay. Anyone else? Well, so to answer that question, we would then have to have a discussion about what do we mean by judgment. So, s- so, so I really do think that this is an ongoing piece of discernment that we would want to do collectively. I will say that for myself, um, the way I have been defining this movement in my own head, and this will perhaps get at your question, I think of Moral Movement Maine as an explicitly multi-faith, multiracial, multi-class justice movement for people of faith who are grounded in the discipline and the practice of radical love. So in my own head, when I ask myself the question, what is moral? What I'm really asking myself is this grounded in radical love? And if so, how do we move to embody it? But the fact that that is the way I define it in my own head does not mean that that's the way everyone defines it. And one of the things that we'll talk about is the fact that this is a movement that we will create together. So of course I have an image of it in my head that I'll share with you, but it could shift. So that discussion is a piece of the creation of the movement. Does that answer your question enough for now? Yeah, I hear you. It's tricky because that word has been weaponized so profoundly and has been used to inflict such profound harm and create such violence in our culture. So it's a really important question, which is why I don't want to give a superficial answer because it's so critical. Yeah. So let me get into just a tiny bit of the history of Moral Movement Maine. So it actually was started in 2018 by one of my friends and colleagues, the Reverend Alan Ewing Merrill, who was at the time a Methodist minister. It arose from a conversation that Portland-based multi-faith clergy were having with one another. I don't remember what the precipitating event was. I'm in Auburn, so this is as Alan related it to me. But at one of their meetings, the rabbi said to them, look, you all, I have my bags packed. I don't know if it's going to be safe for me to stay. I'm ready to go, and I need to know who among you are going to have my back. And out of that moment of intense vulnerability and sharing, that multi-faith group realized that they needed to begin organizing together, figuring out concrete ways to show up for and with one another so that no one felt like they might have to flee because no one had their back. So the first concrete action that Moral Movement Maine engaged in was a pivot in some ways. It was a series of public witnesses in Senator Susan Collins' office. This was when they were voting on the enormous tax cuts. And this is where I became involved in the original Moral Movement Maine. We decided that it was important for people of faith to say, hey, a budget is a moral document, as we have heard a lot since 2018. It's a reflection of who matters and who doesn't, and how we're going to care for one another And these tax cuts and the consequences of them are not going to be caring for the most vulnerable among us. So we sat in the offices. I was civil disobedience. So there were folks in Portland who were arrested, and then Lewis and Auburn who were arrested, and then Bangor who were arrested. And then there were a few more forms of public witness around immigration and solidarity. But it was just a baby movement. And Alan took another job running the BTS Center, doing climate care work. They hired someone else, the pandemic hit, Moral Movement Maine disappeared. So it was a lovely idea, but the flame was not strong enough to endure the storm that blew in on all of us. So I was hired. So the spirit of Moral Movement Maine, I think it's fair to say, continued to exist, but its body did not. The spirit of Moral Movement Maine continued to exist. There was still a hunger to stand with one another, but we no longer had a mechanism to do so across the state. There's no multi-faith body that organizes across the state. When it became clear that it was time for me to leave my church, Alan suggested that I reach out to Maine People's Alliance, is the parent body of Moral Movement Maine, to ask if they wanted to restart the movement. And they said, yes, we do. So it was a little more complicated than that, but you don't need to hear those details. So at the end of the day, I was hired and began my new position in May to develop from the ground up this new old movement. So we're still called Moral Movement Maine. And we still carry the passion and the awareness that we need to stand with one another, stand by one another, and build power together. But we didn't want to make any assumptions about what the true need was now, as compared to what the need was in 2018. So for those of you in congregations, you've probably had conversations about the fact that the pandemic made people question the structure of church. What worked, what didn't, what can we do differently? What do we need to do the same? And we wanted to make space for that same questioning as we organized this new movement. So I came on in May and started out talking with folks who had been involved in the original movement, talking with people around the country who were doing real multi-faith organizing, multiracial organizing, multi-class organizing, and then beginning to have what we call in the organizing world one-on-ones, which we in the church world would just call conversations. But it's a metric. So we call them one-on-ones, which is a conversation with people about Moral Movement Maine. I want to lift up for all of us as we move into our own collective discussion, the intentionality behind naming this movement as explicitly multi-faith, explicitly multiracial, and explicitly multi-class. Because one of the things that we know is often true here in Maine and in many other places is that when we say multi-faith, what we actually mean, at least culturally, is Christian, but you can come if you want. And when we say multiracial, what we mean is white, but we're trying really hard. And what we mean when we say multi-class is probably middle class, maybe a few others, right? And it's not a lack of willingness. It's just that we embody whatever is around us. And so as we're building from the bottom up, we are being very, very intentional about doing everything we can, at least, to not fall into that trap. and to not make assumptions about what the culture of a movement should be, to not make us, any of that, to just make space for every form of questioning, every, possibility for building, which can be hard because sometimes we don't know what assumptions we carry. But nevertheless, it is a goal that we set for ourselves. So the vision that I have developed in my own head, and I'm going to share this and then I'm going to shift us into collective conversation for this movement is, as I said, but I'll repeat it one more time, Moral Movement Maine is an explicitly multi-faith, multiracial, multi-class justice movement for people of faith across the state of Maine who are rooted in the discipline and the practice of radical love. The short version is we're trying to do good. The important counter to that short version, which gets back to your question about morality, is that one of the reasons I believe Moral Movement Maine is so critical right now is frankly the rise of Christian nationalism and its support of fascism in this country. We see that far too often when the religious voice shows up or is invited into conversation, it is a hard right Christian voice that progressive Christians would perhaps say is antithetical to the teachings of Jesus often, but that supports violence and oppression and divisiveness. And there needs to be a counter voice, more than one. I'm happy to say that in Maine, the Maine Council of Churches is also doing that work very intentionally, authentically, faithfully, and they are an excellent sister organization for Moral Movement Maine, but they are explicitly Christian, have chosen to remain explicitly Christian because there needs to be a Christian voice countering the Christian voice. But we have already been in discussions about how we can partner. Same thing with Musan. There's another group, Jews for Justice. Like, we're having all those conversations with sister groups. But the base of our power is all of us, just people recognizing that alone we don't have much power, but collectively we have the power to do anything we want. Truly, if we build our power together, there are enough of us that we could do anything we want. So what I am hoping we can do next is spend some time talking about what you would want this movement to be, what feels energizing, what feels exciting, what feels frightening or confusing. Before we get into that, though, let me ask if you have any questions about anything. Yes. You should not know that because that would be defined differently by probably every person. So, I mean, technically, it just means like getting to the very root of love. For myself, when I talk about radical love, what I mean is the form of love and presence and solidarity and recognition of the sacredness that extends beyond what is comfortable, beyond what feels good, and really does make space all the way to the margins of society. I personally believe that one of the most important things we can do as people of faith is look for where people are most disenfranchised and go there. So for example, I do a lot of work in the harm reduction community, addiction community, because that's one of the places in society where it's still okay to wish people death. And that's horrific to me. And I think that the faith voice needs to be there saying, as people who are grounded in this particular morality, we don't believe that anyone, so for me, that is what it means. Other people will define it in a different way. You're gonna, you're going to keep asking me for definitions, and I'm going to give you my definition and then say, and other people are going to define it in a different way. And the reason I'm doing that is because while I do have a vision in my head and I am using particular language to describe this right now, I really do want to keep re-emphasizing that we will co-create this movement. And so the fact that I say it's a movement rooted in the discipline and practice of radical love doesn't mean that that's how we all have to describe it, or even that that's what it will ultimately look like. It means that's what I think in my head right now. So, yeah. It does. It connects in that I am the organizer of this movement and the tri-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. And therefore, I am a bridge between the two. Practically speaking, a lot of what the Poor People's Campaign is working towards, I would anticipate would be the same kind of justice work Moral Movement Maine would engage in. The PPC is not, Poor People's Campaign is not technically a faith-based movement. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Poor People's Campaign, it's a revival of Martin Luther King's original Poor People's Campaign. It was revived in 2017, 2018. And it was revived by two preachers. So even though it is for people of faith, but not only people of faith, they're preachers, so it feels very Christian. Even though they don't mean it to. But while there are people of faith who organize into the PPC, it is not specifically for people of faith. So I would name us as another sister organization. Yeah, ideally we would show up for them and they would show up for us. Okay. So let me ask you, if you were to imagine in your own head the creation of a movement that was going to work towards justice in the state, we're not working at the federal level, we're working at the state level. What kinds of work would you hope that that movement would do? Yeah.
Example of really, I'll just use an example. I have a really loud voice. I'm sorry if it gets loud. So I was shopping at Trader Joe's, and a homeless person followed me from the store to my car and stole my pocketbook out of my cart while I was putting my groceries in my car. As a social worker, I have been in the trenches in Maine and many places, only in the southern part, but I grew up in Lewiston, spent a good part of my life in Lewiston, and I taught at the Central Maine Community College and taught many African-American refugee wonderful people. So I bring this up because it brought like a huge dilemma to me. First of all, in my pocket was my phone. I'm 78. I had places to go. I was scared. The people at Trader Joe's, the manager was amazing. She later said she wanted to be, would I be her mom? I kind of wanted to adopt her too. She was really, really good. I cried. You can tell I do that easily. But here's the part. So it brought me to that question, like, what could I do about this homeless thing? And then it was like, damn, like, I'm mad. Like, I have no money. I live in subsidized housing. I have worked hard my whole life. I've worked 3 jobs for so many years, I can't even tell you. I was like, how dare she? And then I wanted to know more. So then they call the cop. He comes. He immediately says, I know who it is. She does it every day. Does it every day? So you got to remember, they were living right behind Trader Joe's. My friend asked me, what do you think, why she picked you? I realized I probably looked vulnerable. I had gone to the eye doctor to have my eyes dilated. I had sunglasses on. I was sort of watching where I stood, and that made me mad. I don't want to be vulnerable, damn it. No, I want to be strong. I want to be able to go to the grocery store and not have to worry about somebody stealing anything from me. So then I decided, and this is where the answer is. I wanted information, more information. I asked the cop everything I could about it. I asked him, so who pressed his charges? You'd have to. What would happen? What would happen to her? He says, she'd love it. She'd be in jail for a few months. She'd love it. She'd come out and do the same damn thing. What do I think about that? So then somebody gave me this book and I recommend it to everyone. Maybe most of you, I don't know. It's called Rough Sleepers and it's by Tracy Kidder. And it talks about homelessness in Boston. I used to work in Boston many years ago, teaching in that whole area, and I loved reading that book. However, you finish the book, there is no answer. There is no answer. No answer because these people are very unique. And this part really hit me. Most of them started out because they were homeless youth. They were foster kids, foster homes. They have to let them go. So where do they go? To the streets. Damn, that made me mad. You know, I taught adult ed. I wanted that to help them. So the whole deal is information. Where can things really happen? And so that population and that whole thing is just a piece. And so your question was, where would you like to start, or say it again? First of all, I'd like to think that people were safe. I also was involved that guy that murdered his family up and he got arrested in Yarmouth. John and I were like 5 cars behind all that shit. And I knew, I said, that kid has a story. He hasn't even been tried yet, but I'm sure he has a story. So we don't know anything about people with suffering. Any of these people that we'd like to bring justice to, we have to get to know what their reality is. And they don't really like to talk about it because it's not their life. So how, I just like, even the littlest change you can make is important. I do believe that. Because I worked for so many years and it made a difference. Made a difference. I worked with kids and their families. I worked with kids at Sweetser. I worked in so many areas. So that's what I think.
Thank you. And I think one of the things I'm hearing from you is what we would call political ed resources. And that term implies one thing, but what it actually means in this context is an analysis of a particular situation from a justice perspective. So speaking of the crisis of homelessness, which is, exploding across the state, we actually are in the process. We just sent out a sign-on letter about the sweeps of the encampments. And one of the things that I have been asking colleagues is, would it be helpful to create political ed and worship resources that will explain, hey, these are the systemic reasons that more and more people are ending up on the streets. These are some of the solutions that people who are actually engaged directly with impacted people have proposed. This is why some of the other things like sweeps aren't going to solve the problem. So political education resources for people so that we can get at the root instead of accepting the prevalent moral narrative, which is laziness.
You were asking what direction to go. And I think the first thing as I listened to it is a little bit of process. You asked what things they should concentrate on. You use the word justice and use the word radical love. You talked about a moral movement that involved multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-faith. That's composition. That's not vision. It is part of a vision that it says, this is what we're going to include. But I guess if there is an active recruitment of those people, then at that point, you begin to talk about the themes of where this is going to go. Because it needs to include them. We have our own perspective as white, naive Mainers about what it should be, but we need to be involving them about what theirs is. As somebody who cared as a pediatrician for a lot of Maine care, kids and immigrants and asylum, and 70% of my population was Islamic, is a very different culture with very different vision and needs and direction. So there's a little bit of process there. I also think that clarifying definitions, defining what radical love is, you know, as you said, everybody has their own idea, but I think to the extent that radical love could have some clarity in what that really means for this movement is important. And last but not least, I think we have to be aware of the word moral. It has history. When I was 10 years old, my family got visited by a moral movement that was a spin-off from the John Birch Society. And we have seen that word used in a variety of ways. We use the word weaponized today. We didn't have that term back then, but it was. So I think that when we talk about this publicly, we need to explain to people about what do we mean by moral? Because it does have history and it needs definition. And people, particularly people of my age, have history of what that was through the last 60 years.
I should say that this is not the only conversation that I and we are having. So we are in fact having conversations with Muslim communities and Jewish communities. Like all of that is also happening at the same time. Yeah.
I guess I would like to see the movement offer lots of opportunities for us to engage in acts of love locally, things that we can see the difference we're making. We're not going to solve the big problems, maybe not even have any visible impact on the big problems, but we can see the impact we're having locally and in the communities that we're working together. But I think as important as the change we're bringing about in the community is the change that we're bringing about in ourselves by coming together and working together with a bunch of different people who maybe you thought you had nothing in common with, but we're developing our own radical love muscles in doing that. And then who knows where we could go from there.
Wonder about directly engaging the people we want to help and listening to them and their words and not listen as closely to what we go in thinking. My background, and it's not enough time to talk about it, is the economists were on one side on how you help poor people, and the sociologists were saying, why don't we talk to them? And why don't we hear what it is they need and what it is they're trying to do? There's no presumption, just engage. And I think that's a very powerful way to get started.
Thank you. That's exactly right. And that is one of the reasons it is so important to build a movement in this way, so that we do not imagine that our work is to help them. We understand our movement to include all of us, and therefore we are helping us. And we are doing so by listening to those who are most directly impacted. The Poor People's Campaign talks about the importance of hearing those stories, and learning about what we call the plight, fight, and insight of directly impacted people. Trusting what people describe as their lived experience, trusting and valuing the ways in which people have organized themselves and found that to be successful or not. And then learning from the insight people have gathered through their own experience. And so, yes, absolutely, that is a part of what we do.
I think I live in John's world of process and needing to understand more about process. And mine has to do with I'm a relatively new Mainer. I've been here for about 7 years. And I have a daughter-in-law who works in the food insecurity space. And so she has educated me fairly well about all of the, not all, but the number of organizations just in the Portland area who work on food in issues related to food insecurity. I need a map or something about people who work in this space, because every now and then I get a little bit overwhelmed by just tonight, the number of organizations that are talked about who work on some of these issues. So that's one comment. The second comment would be to add to the multi-generational that I would like to see that happen as well. So a request and a suggestion.
It's lovely to articulate that piece. Thank you. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Wow, you all have gone in an unexpected direction for me. This is not where I expected us to spend our time. It seems like it is worth me saying a little bit more about what I have done so far and what Maine People's Alliance is, because that may address some of the concerns that are being lifted up. Concerns might not be the right word, insights that are being lifted up. So I am organizing Moral Movement Maine under the auspices of Maine People's Alliance. Maine People's Alliance is a grassroots organizing body, which means it organizes from the bottom up, centering the experience of directly impacted people in all organizing and action. It's been around for 40 years. And at this point has a staff of about 20 spread across the state and is focused on a number of different areas. So I organize people of faith. We have an organizer named Muhammad who organizes specifically New Mainers, the immigrant community. We have an organizer named Noelle, who is herself an immigrant, who organizes around housing, primarily tenants' rights, but also a bit around homelessness. We have an organizer who focuses on candidates, because there's another piece of MPA that's a 501c4. And then we have geographically based organizers who organize people into the work just based on where they live. So we have an organizer in Androscoggin County, in Bar Harbor, in Portland. And the way they do the work is to reach out primarily to poor and low wealth people, and then build out the circles of power from there. So So MPA is very grounded in ensuring that when we build power, any kind of power around any type of issue of injustice or justice, we are doing so rooted directly in the wisdom and lived experience of our most impacted members. We call them member leaders. That we are creating circles of conversation and power that are not limited. So this circle is reflective perhaps largely of a particular demographic, but many other circles are very different. And so the conversations that we have at large and in other places are rooted exactly the way that some of you are asking about. So Moral Movement Maine as a piece of MPA is both rooted in those practices and tied into those other circles of power. So for example, when I am working around the crisis of homelessness, I'm working with people of faith, of course, because that's my area, but I also connect with Noel, our housing organizer. I connect with Mohammed because new Mainers have a very different experience of the housing crisis than other folks. And so we share wisdom and experience and power together. So some of the process that you all are naming as necessary both continues to be necessary and frankly will always be necessary, and is also happening because it's the DNA of the way any of us do this work, if that makes sense. So what are some other ways that you would like this movement to engage the work of creating justice?
I'm just thinking about the last space that I was in that was truly multi-faith, multi-class, multi-race, multicultural. And that was a safety training for houses of worship put on by the Department of Homeland Security in Augusta, Maine, that I attended along with a couple of my board of trustees after we were targeted by the neo-Nazis last year. And I remember assuming that it was probably going to be a lot of progressive liberal churches and likely synagogue rabbis, members of synagogues present at that. There were imams and members of mosques there. There were rabbis, synagogues folks, UCCs, UUs, Methodists, Episcopals, guys in MAGA hats, Catholic priests. It was everybody. And I remember having this moment of, just we are all afraid of being hurt and having our people get hurt by someone who hates us. And it was just like all of us. And so that's what I'm thinking of. I mean, obviously homelessness, obviously new Mainers, obviously opioid addiction, like obviously that. But I'm also thinking about if we're thinking about clergy, if we're thinking about people of faith, a lot of us seem to feel under threat right now in a scary way. And so what does an organization like Moral Movement Maine do to help relieve that fear and help us be brave in the face of the reality of that threat? Knowing that the people at that training were probably all over the map about gun rights. So that's a whole other issue, gun violence. But how do we show up for each other if one of us is under threat, no matter their faith? Who can we, I'm thinking about the origins of this movement, which is a rabbi saying, my bags are packed, and who's got my back? And so how can we have each other's back so we don't feel afraid? Something I'm thinking about right now.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I wonder if a piece of that, which is implicit, but is worth maybe saying out loud, is how do we just build relationship with one another and build trust together in a society that is increasingly divided and siloed off? Yeah, thank you.
What you did and you said and confirm it. Because when I look at gun violence and I look at all that kind of stuff, there's a core to it. A core. And the core is fear and the core is hate. I feel that in the last, I'm only 76, so I haven't seen much of this world, but what I have seen is that what is unique to now is this hate. And we lived through the 1960s. We assassinated people back then. We had Chicago, we had Detroit, we had Watts, we had some pretty heavy duty stuff that actually the January 6th thing was not comparable in terms of the violence. But what we didn't have was that sheer hate that we're seeing promulgated today. And I kind of hoped that the moderate Republicans, when it came out with a speaker thing, would finally get together and say, we've had enough of this far right hate. And we're going to stand our ground on that. I'm not going to go into where it turned out. But the whole point was people standing up and being intolerant of the hate and calling it out and confronting them and saying, you're a minority, but those of us, 90% of us, don't agree with you. And we don't tolerate that. And we're going to call you every time you do it. That to me is a very appropriate thing that I think we can do that speaks to the core of so much that's going wrong right now.
I was thinking of that when that group came to, with the masks and it was in front of Portland City Hall and all of that. And, that really is a wake up call. And then I just recently saw pictures of them when they were in Lewiston and the group had grown huge. There were so many more. There was like 10 then and there was like 25 and then it went somewhere else, right? And like that is really disturbing. That would get me to do almost anything.
Yep. Public witness, changing the narrative. Yeah.
Not nearly as eloquent as that, but that's also where I was hoping that some of this was going to go is the right-wing Christian loudness that needs a equally loud, united, religious response to stand up and say, no, you don't represent us. And that's huge. The white nationalism, the Portland fascism, I agree with all of the homelessness and, housing issues and food insecurity. But I think that what's happening right now, what happened today with the House, we need a strong religious response that just says no.
And then let me, one of the questions that comes out of that is what does that response look like, right? Is it worship services? Is it public witness? Is it rallies? Is it training people to write letters to the editor, op-eds? What are all of the different ways? Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So many different possibilities for that. Yeah. Gwen, and then.
Hi. I just wanted to make sure we bring up in this conversation too, because it wasn't mentioned, LGBTQ folks, especially trans people, who I'm very concerned about are under threat, under attack by often these same folks, the white nationalists, Christian nationalists, and who also experience homelessness, poverty, violence, at incredibly high rates. Yeah, so just want to make sure that's part of the conversation.
I might have missed one of the points made, so if I'm repeating something, I apologize. But is there a written part to this? Are you writing books? Are you writing articles? Not for publicity's sake, but for trying to get us to understand outside of meetings like this, what you're doing and why.
There could be written pieces that are specifically explaining what moral movement is and why. Those would need to wait a bit, I think, until we've had more conversation and a little more clarity. But what you might have caught is that one of the pieces that I will definitely be doing as the hired person is presumably myself at first, but then ideally with small groups of people, be creating resources that address specific issues, both in terms of political education, so systemic analysis of issues and solutions, and also worship resources for various faith communities. So we might, we are in fact creating a resource about the crisis of homelessness in the state. What are the systems, and then how could you create a worship service around it? But we could also create resources like that for how do you use your religious voice to counter the narrative of hate in the country? Yes, so absolutely, that is something I anticipate we will do. Yeah.
I'm an activist by heart, okay? And what worries me is that it's like when you know, like for me, I always go out in the elections and, I make phone calls and all that, because one time I didn't do that and someone else was elected, and I was so pissed off at myself because all I could say is, well, what the hell did you do? Nothing. And that's who I am as an individual. I don't want to be somebody who sits back and does nothing. And I'm afraid, like, by God, I don't want there to be a school shooting here in Maine. Like that whole thing. I think there are people working on that, right? But let's say when there is one, then what are we going to say? What did we do? And so I just don't want to see people dying, and
So part of what I hear you maybe asking, Mariette, is, all of this theory and discernment and writing is important because it creates a solid foundation for us. But what's that going to look like in the real world? Right? Like, how we're going to mobilize. And that's actually where I thought this conversation was going to go. You all went a step deeper, which is lovely. But we will need to decide, what does our organizing and power building look like? So, as I said, it could be that we hold workshops about how do you write a letter to the editor? How do you find the contact info? What does it mean to do advocacy at the State House? The Maine Council of Churches actually runs advocacy days every year where they offer that explicit training along with a tour of the State House. So we don't even need to create that. We can just hop on with theirs. How do you write an op-ed? How do you organize a rally? If you hold a press conference, how long do you talk? How do you get the press there? Those are all practical skills that most of us don't have, that are very easy to learn. And actually, when we collectively engage them, make a big difference. Let me give you a very small example, and I apologize, I'm not going to remember the issue correctly. there was an issue before legislators this year. It might have been paid family medical leave. I don't remember. Either way, they had enough votes to pass it, but Janet Mills did not support it, and she was threatening to veto it. But Maine People's Alliance had collected something like 50,000 postcards. And they're like, well, just so you know, if you veto it, we have all these postcards. We're going to do a ballot initiative. You're going to lose. And she was like, well, never mind. And she didn't veto it. And so whatever it was became law because of this simple act of collecting postcards. And of course, it wasn't only that. It was the advocacy, and it was the rallies, and it was changing the narrative. But that was the crowning jewel, something as simple as, hey, will you sign this? Hey, will you sign this? Hey, will you sign this? And then keeping track of it. So there are lots of practical steps, small as they are, that together we can create that change that you're talking about. Takes time and persistence, perseverance.
Something very minor, but for me, I guess sometimes I struggle with where to get information and who to connect to. So is there going to be some kind of network of sign me up and let me know when any one of these things is happening and where get a call to come out? Or are we posting resources on our own, web pages for all of the groups, Maine People Alliance, the PPC, like all of that to get connected?
Well, thank you for asking. Yes, indeed. I would love to have all of your contact info. Some of it I have, but I will set out this notebook, and you all can put your contact info if you are willing. And then the very simple next step is that I'll just put you into our database with a tag Moral Movement Maine, which means that I can then send out an email to everyone on that list. The slightly longer answer is that eventually we will have a page on the MPA website, so people will be able to access it that way. And MPA does actually have a comms team, so we'll probably post on Instagram and Facebook and all of that, resources that people can share yourselves. But yes, absolutely. And this is another question that I wanted to ask, so maybe we can just include it because we're getting short on time, is there are so many sister organizations out there that are doing incredible work. The Maine Council of Churches, Mooson, the BTS Center, which does astonishing climate care work. There's a group called Jews for Justice. There are so many organizations that are still siloed off because we don't have this kind of multi-faith organizing. But when we get our feet under us, we can share all of those activities, and then we can do some discernment around, so BTS Center is doing amazing climate work. So I'm not going to spend my time putting together a resource packet. I'm going to write to Alan and say, hey, Alan, we're going to send you some folks. And then the BTS Center, which focuses on the spiritual grounding in climate care, but wants people to do more boots on the ground work, is going to send people who want to be activated to us so that we can mobilize in concrete ways. So all of that will happen. Yes. Yeah.
I don't want this. Anyway, I'm just starting to come to Hillary's church here. And so will I be able to find more information from you and in the channels or whatever? Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Seriously, a significant part of my job is just having conversations with people, meetings, one-on-ones, 2 on whatever. Yes. So we will get the word out. And actually, one of the best ways to build out that circle of power is through direct introductions. So another question that I have for you all to think about is, who do you know in your life that may be interested in this work, who I could reach out to, or ideally you could introduce me to, so that I could have that kind of conversation. Yeah. But I want to go back to, what time is it right now? Okay. Okay. Let me go quickly back to that question of sister organizations. Because I would love to hear from you any other groups that you know of, specifically groups that are faith-based, because there are an endless number of justice groups in the state. If you know of any groups that are faith-based, that are oriented towards justice, that you think we should be organizing with.
Portland, it's just for it's across from but that church
Okay.
and so I have a friend Lydia. I like the
Yes, I've already spoken with Jeff. Yeah, they're amazing. For those of you who don't know, Grace Street is a street ministry in Portland, and they do incredible work. It's a street ministry in Portland. Yeah. Okay, so that's fine. So we only have a few minutes left, and I would love to spend that time. I have a poem to close us, and I am going to put out a notebook, and I would love for you to share your information if you are comfortable with me popping you into our database so you start getting emails. But I would love to hear from you before we close, any final questions you have, and I'm trying to tweak these conversations. As you have noticed, you all went in a different direction, which I loved, but was not prepared for. And so I would love feedback, honest feedback. Don't worry about hurting my feelings. Feedback about what went well for you in this meeting and what you wish had happened in this meeting, so that I can, next time I sit with a group of people, do it better. Well, it's not so much what I was looking for as what I had anticipated through my limited lens. Let's say it that way. I had anticipated that when I said, what would you want this movement to do? You all would say, I want to learn how to write a letter to the editor. Not, I want you to define radical love. So I was up here and y'all were like, no, that's not good enough. We're going to go down here, which was amazing and is good learning for me. I don't know what I was thinking. I know. Look, y'all, you're not my first group, but you're my first UU group since I left my church. I'm out of practice. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Right. That's such a good question. I was just having this conversation with someone, and they somewhat I was going to say crassly, but that's not fair. It felt crass to me, even though it was accurate. Who's in and who's out? Who's a part of the circle, and who is so far outside of where we think we are headed that we're not going to be able to work together? It's a very big question. I would start by saying what I know you know, but just so that it is explicitly stated in the circle, that there's usually a lot more nuance than we anticipate. So not all Jews hate Palestinians, and not all Palestinians hate Jews, right? Like, that's one of the reasons those conversations are so hard, is that there's a myriad of perspectives and reasons, and some of them are personal and some of them are systemic. So part of the answer is that we make space for those really hard, vulnerable conversations, recognizing that we're bringing our own stuff into it. And we might have our own knee-jerk reaction to it, and we still need to discipline ourselves to sit in that space and make space for one another, which means that a big piece of this work, even though it doesn't feel very concrete, is building trust together, right? I'm not going to sit in a circle and share my deepest fear or my deepest rage with people that I anticipate are going to jump on me first thing, right? I need to know that I can open myself that deeply and be seen, and even lovingly challenged, which is also going to happen, but not attacked. Like, we just, so trust building, covenants of behavior, honestly, and we'll need to do some discernment. So for example, we've already talked at MPA about the fact that this is a multi-faith movement, but we're still finding better language than progressive people of faith. But realistically, we know MPA is in support of reproductive rights. Like, that's not negotiable. So if someone is not in support of reproductive rights, they may not feel comfortable in this movement. They may feel like, hey, I can step in and work on these issues and just not that issue, and that's okay, but we're not going to not do that work, because one of our foundational understandings is that we are explicitly countering the conservative Christian voice, and there just needs to be a group that does that. So as I keep saying, we need to do some discernment together, but there will be some parameters set around where we're going to locate ourselves in the work, and then trust within that circle, trust one another to be present so that we can grow together. Y'all keep asking me to make decisions that are not only mine to make. So I think, I mean, in part based on MPA, our parent organization, they are a progressive organization. So if there was someone in the group that said, hey, we're going to do this, and MPA said, that's the exact opposite of our stance, it's not going to fly in the movement. I expect that I think there's going to be some very rapid self-sorting, frankly. If we say this is a movement for progressive people of faith, if we say this is a movement that is rooted in the discipline of love, people are going to sort themselves out pretty quickly. So I think the larger parameters are already intuitively set, and that it's going to be the sticky or hard conversations.
I'd like to put a positive spin on it, because there is so much common ground that these different faiths can buy into. I gave you the example of what I did in the last 10 years of my life as a pediatrician. And what I was astounded at was I decided to listen to them, whether it was reading the Quran, whether it was doing the 40 Hadith and all the rest of that stuff. But I was amazed at the commonality of faith, the commonality of attitude and perspective of life that we all shared. In fact, I remember joking with them at one point. I said, "Are you sure you guys aren't UUs?" Because of the commonality of what it was we were facing as fellow human beings. There is a lot of fodder out there to work with. And I think that this is an example of a movement that can tap into that.
I agree.
This might sound real minor or simple, yet it's extremely huge and extremely difficult or complicated. But if somehow people, society, could be encouraged to think for themselves.
I give that a very big amen. Yes, yes. When we talk about changing the moral narrative, we talk about creating resources. Part of what that is offering a different grounding to knock us collectively out of what we've just absorbed so that we can start to ask that question. Wait, is this right? Is this necessarily true? Yeah. I can tell by y'all starting to get ready to go that it might be time to wrap up. Are we at time? Okay.
You got 3 minutes.
I got 3 minutes. Oh, I miss church people. All right, my friends. I am going to close us with a poem. Before I read it, out of everything that we've talked about and all the tools that we have named and all of the ways of thinking, the truth is that our greatest strength is just power building. And by that, I mean building power with one another. And by that, I mean building relationship with one another. We know, like, to get wonky for a second, statistically, there are more people in this country who support policies and practices that create space for all life to thrive than not. We are just not together. And so at the end of the day, no matter what else we do, the purpose of this movement is to bring us together. And so this poem, which some of you have certainly heard before, addresses that. It's called The Low Road by Marge Piercy. What can they do to you? What can they do to you? Whatever they want. They can set you up. They can bust you. They can break your fingers. They can burn your brain with electricity, blur you with drugs till you can't walk, can't remember. They can take your child, wall up your lover. They can do anything you can't stop them from doing. How can you stop them? Alone. You can fight, you can refuse, you can take what revenge you can, but they will roll over you. But two people fighting back to back can cut through a mob. A snake dancing file can break a cordon. An army can meet an army. Two people can keep each other sane, can give support, conviction, love, massage, hope, sex. Three people are a delegation, a committee, a wedge. With four, you can play bridge and start an organization. With six, you can rent a whole house, eat pie for dinner with no seconds, hold a fundraising party. A dozen make a demonstration. 100 fill a hall. 1,000 have solidarity and your own newsletter. 10,000 power and your own paper. 100,000 your own media. 10 million your own country. It goes on one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again after they said no. It starts when you say we and know who you mean, and each day you mean one more. Thank you all so much for taking time in the middle of your week to be here. This has been a very powerful conversation. I appreciate all of your insight and your questions. I am going to put out my notebook if you all, for any of you that feel comfortable sharing your information, and I'll stick around if you have any last minute questions, or Hillary can give you my info, so you can shoot me an email too if you want to just go home.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all.